Sweet. So, yep. Hello, everybody. It's our usual unplanned and unscripted, very badly prepared for stream for our new patch that came out on the 13th. Yeah, it's about a year since our last patch before then. And yeah,
these patches are getting big.
Yes, and actually one thing I do need to talk about later, we'll have a chat on stream about it, is stability, and if it's actually getting too big and if we need to start worrying, or if I'm just imagining issues. But yeah, we'll have a chat about that later. But yeah, so it's Crucible 2.08. Don't think it'll be too much longer until we do a v3, which I think will involve us scrubbing out as many files as we can for our sanity when modding, but also for stability and stuff. Yeah, 2.08.
Maybe we'll squeeze in a 0.9 before.
We definitely are, because I've got a few things to do in real life, but then I do want to get going with IDH.
Yeah, so that whole rework.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll talk for about 30 seconds, just my plans with it. We're going to firstly rework. These will probably both be done when it gets released, but we're going to first rework just the base units, so that you can pretty much play it up to tier 3 without choosing a subfaction. So that's probably, I think, going to be about another 6 to 8 units. So this will be that big fuck off building, the watch something. When you get in tier 1, whatever, that big building, and then the teleporting building, not the Grey Knight's teleporter, but the Astral Telepathica. Jesus, I can't remember the names of anything.
Yeah,
so they'll be filled up with standard units, and then when you get to tier 2, you'll get access to choosing the subfaction. So everything that's Grey Knight currently will go in there. So you'll only be able to do things like the Grey Knight Land Raider. I think some Grey Knight. What the Walker's called, Dreadnoughts. So everything that's kind of Grey Knight will be locked into the Grey Knight subfaction, and then I think to start off, we'll just have one other subfaction. There were chats about various things we can do, like Mechanicus. Not promising anything. Obviously, it's not me and Oleg that make the models. It will be depending on what Keck has available and what he's happy to be in Crucible. Because just because something does exist doesn't mean that it's not something that's for unification as a specific unit. Yeah, they are made for unification, and if they want to keep them in there as exclusives, so for an example is most of the Imperial Knights, then that's up to them. They did the work, they made it. We have no claim over anything. So maybe Mechanicus, maybe other stuff. I'm going to start planning it in a couple of days. And I want that out before V3. So yeah, that'll be 2.09, and I'm sure other stuff. So yeah. Anything you want to say before we start going through the changelog?
Not really. I would give my own plans, but I actually don't have any concrete plans with Tyranids done. Technically, it would be Dark Eldar next, but because of the lack of content, we might need to delay Dark Eldar further. So I'm not actually sure what I'll be working on next. It'll probably be the Eldar Stronghold, if I can get that done.
Are there any other strongholds you've not done now that IG's done?
So Neo, who will be mentioned later on because he's the one who made the prototype, is currently working on the CSM Stronghold. And apart from that, the ones that are left are Tau.
Oh yeah.
And Tau, Dark Eldar, and Eldar. So it'll probably be Eldar next, and then probably Tau. Because Dark Eldar yeah, Dark Eldar are Dark Eldar. They'll need time to cook. Basically, what it comes down to. So
Yeah.
that's kind of vague plans, but I can't really say anything more concrete because I don't really have the concrete timeline in my own head even. So we'll see. Yeah, no, Dark Eldar definitely need a lot of love. I feel like demons are in a good spot right now, where they got their reworked subfactions, they got new units. Maybe I'll need to go back and specifically revise Undivided, because I've heard that that is kind of a little bit But being a demon main, where it's one of my two main factions, I feel like demons are in a good spot. They have a good variety of units now. They have a good variety of playstyles, actually.
It's not Oleg on the screen. It's Eskalia. But maybe in the future we'll get both of us on the stream.
We'll see.
Yeah. I kind of feel that demons are, they're obviously not perfect, but they do feel like a fully fleshed out race. Dark Eldar, way worse. Obviously, I'm sure everyone will agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so onto the change log then. Oleg is a bit quieter. Okay, I'm just gonna...
Don't edit it on your end. Let me fix that on my end. That should be a bit better.
Sweet. Yep. So if I bring up the... Nope. I'll explain why that's there in a second. It's because of this first one, which ironically is probably the most contentious thing we've ever done.
So one of the fun things that we get to do is, because we're releasing this stream a bit after the patch actually went out, we get to talk about not just the changes, but also the initial reactions to some of the changes. And the taskbar was... like, I think this blindsided all of us how controversial this change was.
Yeah.
Where, like, we've been saying for literal years that, hey, don't look at them. They're useless. They're
We've not actually said what
pointless.
we're talking about. This is the DPS... what do you call it? The DPS icon on the center bottom of the UI, the one that says, 10 to 20.
Yeah.
For the people that aren't sure what we're talking
about. Sorry, I jumped forward a bit, but yes, that is what I'm referring to.
Yeah, so that's something that's been in the game from... Obviously, it's just a part of the core engine. It's been there for forever.
Yeah.
So basically then, people have... Well, 90% one person, but we've heard it from other people, have been giving every excuse under the sun why they want it there. And I think it proves the reason why we actually removed it in the first place, because people want it because they think they're getting something from it. They think they're getting information from it. We've said it a million times, the information is 100% useless, and people don't seem to be able to understand why that is. So I'm going to show in a minute and try and explain why. But it kind of proves just why we got rid of it, because people are so attached to it when all it is absolute bollocks. Probably not, Alistair.
Yeah. I was considering the idea of just having a random string of numbers there just to fill the space, but we might even not be able to do that depending on how exactly the UI is set up.
I don't think we need to bother with that. I think that was just more of a middle finger to the guy that was... Not that people aren't allowed to have their opinion.
To be fair, it is a good thought experiment. If people who dislike the change, would you be happy with a string of random numbers knowing they are random numbers in there? Would that be a acceptable change? Because if not, then you're actually trying to take value from them, because in actuality it was the equivalent value of a string of random numbers. So if you're not happy with a string of random numbers, it reinforces why we decided to get rid of it in the first place, because you're trying to extract some information from it when you shouldn't.
Yeah. So, to explain why it's so useless and why we can't really even do what Alistair's asked. So Alistair said, will there be anything else to show how much relative damage a weapon does compared to another? So a few things. Firstly, so this is the spreadsheet that we use to balance weapons. This is kind of all the stats. So firstly, just in general, Dawn of War is very difficult to really show how weapons work. So something for a StarCraft 2, for example, you've got a damage value, and it goes against the unit you're shooting at, and the damage is reduced by armor. That is it. The way Dawn of War works, I'm going to zoom in a little bit when I remember how, is that we have 18 armor types.
Control plus.
I've did it with the clicky. So you've got 5 for the infantry and monster medium, which is basically another infantry. Demon commander, 3 for the vehicles, 3 for the buildings. Air, living metal, titan, super. So you haven't just got one type of damage, you've got 18 types of damages going against 18 types of armor. So rather than just having sort of...
By the way, there's still armor, because some units will have different armor. So what happens is that these values actually go against the armor of the unit, which is different from the armor type, because different units of the same armor type can have different armor values. So it's the same StarCraft 2 calculation, but 18 times over.
And in a way, you can also think of it when actually comparing against something else. It's 18 times 18, which is 324. And I think you can almost then times that by another 2, because you've got the base armor. So in a way, comparing Dawn of War just to StarCraft 2, you've got 648 times more complexity to show in a tooltip. It doesn't work. That is why we have stuck with the whole what's it good against. So you just need to combine.
Furthermore, something to remember is StarCraft 2 shows you the damage, the attack speed, the range, if it's modified by like damage modifiers or like upgrades, it shows you the kind of a value that is upgraded. All of these things, the value that we have here in DAO does not show.
Yes.
Like, it's just the min to max base damage.
Let me explain
No
this.
attack speed taken into account, no upgrades, nothing.
So that damage is meant to show just like the base damage. So here we have min and max. So the Eldar Shuriken pistol for the Warlock, 13 damage to 25 damage. So every damage tick will be between that. And that is all it shows in game. But actually, just the base DPS has to also include the fire rate. The fire rate can be as low as 0.3. It can go as high as, in terms of regular stuff, 4 seconds. So that's already 30 times less damage compared to 0.3. 4 seconds, 0.3. And accuracy needs to be taken into account. Just to get a base damage, which is what we have here, we have the DPS. And that takes into account, if you look at the formula, it's the average of the base damage modified against the fire rate, modified against the accuracy, just to give you a basic DPS figure. But all you've got in game was these two numbers. They are useless if they don't take into account fire rate and accuracy.
I think the D-cannon, like a few lines down, is a great example, because that one has a slow attack speed.
Yeah.
So you can really see the difference between the base numbers and the actual DPS on the other end.
Yeah, so if you can just compare that to this Witchblade. The Witchblade looks, very, very weak in terms of single target damage. But when you look at the actual adjusted DPS, when it takes into account the fire rate, oh look, it's better. This is the point. we just had to get rid of it, and we can't really replace it with anything numerical, because it's, apart from just giving you this figure, which we could do, but it's not particularly useful, we couldn't really do anything without giving you 18 damages. So we just need to say it's good against this, it's good against that, and take into account, you know, the tier. If you've got a tier 2 unit that says good against vehicles and a tier 3 unit that says good against vehicles, the tier 3 unit will have more damage. You'll have to just run off assumptions, because there's no other way to really do this. It's just too complex.
And to make this even more complex, if, let's say, you take something like a vehicle or a Titan, which has multiple big damage weapons, it will only show you the damage of one of the weapons.
Yeah.
So if you have a Titan with 2 arms, both of which are different guns...
Okay, that's none of these then. Space Marines. Right. Fuck, did we not put them in?
No, they're just a little bit further above. I'm pretty sure I did subfactions under the...
Cool. Well, we got these anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Lucian, Pattern, Reaver, Titan.
Yeah.
Starts off with a Mega Bolter in one arm and a Titan Plasma Blast Gun in the other arm.
Yeah. Both of which have comparable DPS, but you'll only see the DPS of one of the weapons.
This is perfect. 250 to 400 on one arm.
Yeah.
Has a higher adjusted DPS than 2,000 to 3,000. It's 585 versus 500.
Yep.
Okay, so I just mean, even in anti-infantry only cases, how might a new player know the difference between, say, a shuriken cannon compared to a star cannon? Okay, perfect question. Shuriken cannon says effective versus infantry and heavy infantry, and it's AoE. The star cannon says it's effective versus infantry and heavy infantry. So this is where you have to make the assumption, because if you've got a well-balanced game, if they're in the same tier, then the star cannon has to have a higher damage because it's single target, and the shuriken cannon has because it's AoE. Because if that wasn't the case, it'd just be overpowered.
Yeah. And
you have to make these
assumptions.
Descriptions
are not descriptive enough for people, if without the illusion of these numbers, people are confused or unsure about weapons and their use cases, that's okay. We can then fix the descriptions. We can give a little bit more detail in the description, or something that you've been doing with Eldar that I've kind of been considering doing for other factions but haven't because it's a hell of a lot of work, is like specifically saying what the weapon is meant to be used against, or the use case for the weapon.
It's a huge amount of work, but...
Because that is the only reasonable way to give that information. The other answer is you just have to try the weapon and feel it out for yourself, which is kind of a cop-out answer, but yeah.
Yeah, it's such a complex game that I think even compared to some other games like StarCraft 2, it really is a game where if you want to get good, you've got to come to the Discord and chat to people, because it's very weirdly designed as a game. It certainly, if you were going to design a competitive esport type RTS, you would not make any of the game decisions that, the design decisions that were made for Dawn of War, because it's too complex. This whole 18 armor class thing, although the vanilla didn't have 18 armor classes, but it still had 10 or whatever. It's intrinsically not a good way to design a game where people really know what's going on. If you want to know all the numbers, it's just wacky complex. I don't know if there's ever been another RTS that's been kind of designed with this damage system.
Command and Conquer is kind of similar, but it's a lot more simplified.
Yeah. Anyway, we've been chatting for half an hour, and we're on the first line of the change log.
Yes.
Should we?
let's get a move on.
Should we run away? Okay. I'll let you talk about some stuff, because I've got
So yeah, there's a bunch of kind of fixed description cases. So the main thing is the prototype. We've dubbed it survival for now. But if you're thinking it's like survival in a unification sense, that's not the inspiration point, or that's not really something we're considering. It's closer to survival in the sense of, if you've played, God, we're doing a lot of StarCraft 2 references in this. If you've played In Utter Darkness, the kind of Protoss defense mission where you just have to survive for as long as possible. It's basically that, where there isn't really an end goal. You just survive wave after wave until you eventually, die. And something that we've done is sorry, to step back a second. Neo is the one who's primarily coding this. I'm playing something of a kind of advisory or supporting role in this. So there's a few unique things about the game mode. First of all, your tiers are restricted until certain waves. So for example, you'll be restricted to tier 0 until you complete wave 1, or until wave 1 completes, because they automatically tick over on a timer. So the idea is that you can't just rush into late game, build up your kind of late game defenses super early on, and then just sit there. You are forced to engage with your faction's units and your kind of what your faction can do at every single tier, where every single tier you'll need to hold enemy waves at. So you need to know, okay, what can my faction do in tier 2, for example? Because a lot of the time, people tend to skip tier 2 and go straight to tier 3 or tier 4 because that's where the big boys are. But now you're stuck in tier 2 for a few waves, and you have to learn how to defend those waves in tier 2. That's a major thing. There's a lot of different things we can talk about in terms of design on it. One thing I do want to mention is that it's currently in its prototyping stage. And why that's important is because the way that we release patches is that we try to not release them too often, or we try to pack a good amount of content into each patch, because every single patch we need to go and upload it to ModDB. You need to go and download multiple gigs and then install it. So we're conscious of that and we try to pack a lot of changes together in order to make, the patch actually worth installing. But because this prototype is being developed super quickly, there is a channel in the Discord where Neo is posting consistent kind of updates to the prototype basically every few days. And so if you want to play the latest version, go into the Discord, go into the survival mission channel, and grab the latest version from there. Once it's done, once the game mode is in a mostly complete state where we've ironed out all of the bugs, we've added all of the main features we wanted to add, it will be packaged into the next patch, and then everyone will just have it as a baseline. But for now, until it's finished, it will be updated quicker in the Discord than we actually release patches.
Yeah, so I would suggest if you want to play a lot of this game mode, do join the Discord, because you're going to have a much better experience, a much more worked on product. Anything else to say about this prototype?
Description gives a good amount of detail. One thing I do want to mention is that we are considering expanding it into multiplayer, but that will be once it's finalized, because in order to play it multiplayer, there's a whole version thing going on where, if you have a different version from someone, you can't play it. So multiplayer will only be a thing once the game mode is fully finalized, but we are considering it.
Sweet. Yeah, so the run stuff just altered a little bit. Win conditions, I think we've just had a bit of updates. Anything in particular here that's interesting? This was just something that one person asked for and someone just made it. Can't remember who asked for that.
Added a new subfaction. Yes, yeah, it's just a bunch of self-explanatory changes to win conditions. There's not really.
These two maps are quite well known for being buggy. So if you're someone that wants to use these maps, so Castle, Roesteinen, and Tarsus Ultra, they should actually work as expected now after probably a decade of them being buggy. Campaign stuff.
So, major thing here is the Imperial Stronghold got the Crucible treatment, so it is now properly up to strength with everything. I'm not going to go into it much. The one thing that I will say is that it's the first Stronghold where the main difficulty comes from map changes rather than just increased pressure. Where for other strongholds, the difference between normal, hard, and brutal has nearly always been things are faster, you need to do things quicker, there's more enemies and they come at you quicker. That's basically been the template. Like Necron is a good example where on brutal you have half the time you would on normal for the main objective. Here, in the Imperial Guard Stronghold, most of the timers are actually the same between all the difficulties. And the main difficulty comes from the difference in the map, where there are way more obstacles and quite nasty tricks on brutal that don't exist on normal or hard. So I'm interested to see how this design philosophy is received, because it's a very different approach.
Sweet.
Apart from that, just some basic fixes in the campaign section.
I'll quickly mention this one because this one was a bit obvious. People who noticed Eldar, when you were going against the Necron HQ, you had those units you started off with, depending on which craft ward you chose. Sometimes you couldn't get their aspect leaders. That's all been fixed now. Then the rest is just some balance stuff and some typo stuff. Demons.
Apologies. I actually need to read through these because these were made ages ago. This is what happens when you spend like a year working on Apache. So some basic fixes. Remove dimension ascension. Just some basic texture and description fixes. No balance changes needed. Chaos Space Marines. So for some reason, the Chaos Spikes did not have the Marine injections thing. If you don't know what that is, all Marine units in the base game have an ability called Injections, which is a passive ability which just gives them like a crap ton of more health and all of that. I don't know why Relic decided to do it this way.
I can tell exactly why. When I reckon it was as simple as when they were just designing them and doing some play testing, they just wanted a one ability that they could change the health of, so that they could just globally change the whole race's health by changing one number while doing some initial balance testing and play testing, which means now that once the game's fully made, actually doing any balance stuff is a pain in the arse, because according to the base health, it's half of what it actually is in game. It's right annoying. I actually removed that mechanic from a lot of races. It just took a load of time. So things like Sisters of Battle and IDH used to have that, and I actually just manually got rid of them all and added.
And Space Marines don't have it either, but Chaos Space Marines do, because I wasn't bothered to remove it. So instead, I just added it onto the bike so that they have their proper health now, because like they had just so little health and everything compared to everything else. Obliterators and Mutilators. So this is an interesting one. So, Obliterators. Why can't I say that word? Obliterators and Mutilators. I remember buffing them a while ago, like a few patches ago, because they were kind of useless, or they just didn't do enough for their cost. And then, when the CSM rework happened, I gave them all of the abilities that we use to give infantry buffs. So for context, at some point, we had too many units to fit into the 45 limit for researches. So what we had to do is we had to create abilities that when you research the research, then activates the ability, and that's how infantry get their buffs from their researches. So I added all of those onto the Obliterators and Mutilators, and suddenly they are doing ridiculous damage and are ridiculously tanky. My guess is because before they only benefited from some, if any, of those infantry researches, but now they're benefiting from all of them. So, oopsie, my bad. So what I decided to do for now is kind of actually make use of this, where I kept their tankiness the same, where I didn't nerf their tankiness in any way, so they should be very, very tanky, but I nerfed their damage significantly. So the idea is CSM has a lot of, with the subfactions, CSM has a lot of high damage tier 3 and tier 4 units, where all of the Terminators for all of the different factions, except for potentially Nurgle, do crap ton of damage. They have, new vehicles that do a lot of damage, especially with the subfaction buffs, etc., etc. So the idea here is to try to get those two to fit a role of tanky DPS, where it's not that they'll do that much damage, but they'll do some damage to still be a threat, and they'll soak a lot of damage. So we'll see how that works. We'll see how people feel about it. Maybe I'll need to have a look at them again or rework them again. That's the current idea.
I just ran some maths, and if they didn't have the infantry upgrades and you added them, because they're stacking and multiplicative, depending on whether they gave 20 or 25% each tier, they were either 72% buffed or 92% buffed.
Yeah. It was a lot. And also the Obliterators, their weapon works weird. I'm not going to rant about it because God, but their weapon works weird, and I made it work like you think it would work, is basically what it is.
One of those situations where everyone assumes something's happening, like the Eldar ability on the Warlocks that protects them. It had never worked.
Yeah.
It never worked, and everyone just assumed it did. It was one of them situations. And then the rest of it just looks like quite minor stuff.
I can bear type swap to from commander to heavy infantry. Yeah, land raider gritter. Yeah. Typos. The pseudo transferred. Oh, the pseudo transport change is interesting. Where it's a way. I've been toying around with ways to make transports better, because a lot of the time transports are kind of or are very situational. So this is, I feel, because you're going corn, it's very thematic for you to put melee units into transports, which is not something you actually ironically want to do. Ironically enough, the best unit usually to put in transport is a long-range support unit that is slow, but then you pop it out of the transports, it shoots a bunch, you pop it back in, run it somewhere else. So this is hopefully a way to make putting melee units into transports a little bit better. Where before the buff was very small because I was afraid of it stacking, but trying to stack it, especially with the clunky positioning of vehicles,
it makes sense because you can just shoot them. So. Yeah, you can just destroy the transport. It's not that tanky.
Just shoot them.
Yeah. That's really fun actually because you can put them in the transport, get them to the front line so they're in better condition when they get to the front line, pop them out, they're full health, and then the enemy's either got to spend some time destroying the transport to get rid of that 25% damage reduction, or they ignore it. Yeah, that's quite a fun interaction. The thing is, all the transports in the game at the moment pretty much are just transports with those transport abilities, which feel like they were just kind of plonked on them to try and make them useful.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much just global and boring.
So over time, I might just try to give most transports some kind of unique mechanic going on to make them a little bit more interesting to play. We'll see.
Sweet. And then the Dreadnought.
Kind of first attempt at that. Yeah, then Dreadnought, it was just weak. This is basically what it comes down to.
Yeah. So nothing for the Dark Eldar. Eldar.
Your turn to talk.
I'll try and whiz through this pretty quick. So the general gist of this was, firstly, I do a lot of AI testing, but I haven't done a lot of PvP for the last couple of years. And I was never struggling with the early game for Eldar, so I never actually realised how weak they were when you start just testing PvP matchups. So there was a lot of work done on early game buffing. And then a lot of people have been saying for a while that Eldar were also falling off sort of late tier 4, tier 5. So the Eldar aspect system, although it's tricky to use and it's expensive, it was giving you very, very strong infantry in the mid game. People were saying that Eldar really were struggling in the early game and the late game. So firstly, Altensar, their tier 3 research, which was kind of meant to be the whole identity of this craft world, where they really stopped taking morale damage, was not working particularly well. It was just a global aura. So now I've just duplicated the aura that was on the avatar and popped it on the Farseer, the Autarch, and the Shadow Seer. So that is the one that as soon as your infantry get close enough, they just go back to full morale and stop taking it until they get far enough away. So it takes a bit more APM, but it actually works perfectly now. The shared research for the aspect armor, that I've just realized I didn't actually change the description properly, at least on one of them, because I just noticed in game. They used to just add a bit of armor, but that didn't really do too much. So it felt like the aspect warrior craft worlds were not great because this wasn't doing enough. So this is now giving a bit more armor, but it's actually going to give you 10% health and damage buffs. And then the extra armor was added to just the normal infantry health upgrades. So this should be now, if you do want to go for a aspect warrior craft world, they will actually be meaningfully better, especially because you've got 2 tiers of this. So that's so like 22, 23% extra power when you get to tier 3. And then Ulthwi, Biltan, and Ayandan no longer have that extra 1 pop cap nerf to the aspect warriors. That was kind of a lore thing, because Ayandan and Biltan both got absolutely shanked and lost most of their population, and Ulthwi has always relied on the Guardians. It was kind of okay purely for immersiveness, but it wasn't working good for the game. And this was the thing that was fucking up the Necron
the
stronghold. with not being able to, get X-Archers on the squads and stuff. Just yeeted it all, which means now that the most famous aspect craft world, which is Biotan, no longer has that quite significant nerf. Infantry health researchers now give that +1 armor. Aspect warrior researches, just a standardization of cost. Before there was, I think, warp spiders, shining spears were both more expensive because of the power of the unit, and I think Dire Avengers and Howling Banshees were more expensive because they had to give a bigger boost because they were weaker to start off with because they were the tier 0 units. Everything's just standardized. So early game, just take a little bit less resources for that. And then the infantry researches, the 4th tiers used to only affect the aspect warriors. That has now been made global. So the main thing is Wraith units. Wraith Guard, Wraith Blades, Ancient Wraith Guard will now all be affected by that 4th tier of infantry researches in tier 4. What this means in terms of how I've done some counter nerfs is that when you get into tier 4 with normal Wraith Guard and Wraith Blades, they will be better. They will scale the extra tier. But the Wraith Cannon, in all its glory, is not going to be 20% stronger. It's going to start off 20% weaker in when you get to tier 4, and we'll get to its original strength as soon as you get that research. We couldn't let that scale anymore. That would have been ridiculous. And then everything on the Ancient Wraith Guard has had that counter nerf so that it'll be weaker in tier 4 until you get the researches, and then they'll get back to their original strength. So there is no appreciable buff in tier 4 to what made tier 4 great, which is Ancient Wraith Guard and Wraith Guard with Wraith Cannons. But everything else is a bit stronger, which what I enjoy is the other weapons on the Wraith Guard have got another tier of buffs when you get to tier 4, so very useful.
I do think it's a good change in general, because it was very one note where you get to tier 4 and it was just optimal to spam this one thing because everything else was just underpowered. So now hopefully there's a lot of other things which are equally powerful, but could be more useful in some specific situations or some other situations.
It was a really weird thing. I'd given the Aspect Warriors the sole access to the tier 4 research to try and make them more attractive against Wraith units, but it was still better to go for Wraith units. So ironically, giving everything that actually made things more balanced, it was a weird thing. Fleet of Foot always did more than what it said in the description. It always gave a passive buff as well as the active in both tiers. Yeah, no one knew about it. I did. Whoops. It's in the description now. People should actually know about it now. So this is one of the big things that I was not aware of, just how bad Guardians were, considering they're actually quite expensive.
Melee Storm Guardians actually feel tanky now. They're tankier than Banshees, which is great.
Yeah. So it should be useful. Dire Avengers. I think the too long didn't read for all of this is stronger in tier 0, a bit stronger in tier 1, and then get to their original strength in sort of tier 2 or 3. So yeah, early game buff. And early game buff to the Howling Banshees. These both have a certain amount of vehicle pen, so that's just added when you get the X-Arch. So it's added to the X-Arch description, just to have a little bit of vehicle pen. Striking Scorpions also got some basic anti-vehicle added. This is mostly light vehicles and does a bit of damage against medium vehicles. So yeah, some basic tanks in the beginning of the game. The Striking Scorpions might be able to do something to it. And then Warp Spiders, it was to make them more different to other aspects. It's more It's less range and more AoE, and then more damage. So, yeah, just to make them a bit different.
Because the one thing I noticed is apart from platforms, Eldar do tend to lack AoE.
Yeah, it was just another
especially
thing.
now with aspects all being available in tier 1, if you're going against something like Tyranids and you know they're going to try to swarm you, you can actually build AoE outside of platforms.
Yeah, the problem was you've always got the choice between Dire Avengers, Dark Reapers, Warp Spiders, and because Dark Reapers did have some AoE from the X-Arch, it was kind of like they've got the AoE, they've got the range to make them safe, they do plenty of damage. Why go for anything else? So I've certainly been guilty of just really relying on Dark Reapers game after game. Now with the Dire Avengers being very versatile in melee as well, and their morale restore, and then the Warp Spiders being a much more dedicated AoE damage, I think it's a bit more of a choice now for people to make. Grav platforms no longer have run, but they will run when attached to a squad with run. Just some adjustments to descriptions so you know what affects what in terms of researches, because you do have the greater grav platforms, so we had to specify what researches affect what. And the descriptions of the infantry, DPS and health upgrades specify now that they do affect the grav platforms. We do kind of consider grav platforms an extension of the infantry. Yeah. Torch is a detector. We tell you that now. Something new then. Add damage reduction for a squad. So whatever you attach it to will gain that. Just to make it a bit more useful. So obviously the Torch is quite a boring unit. We had to give it a bit more.
Yes, and also, like from the testing that I did, Autarch basically lost against every other tier 0 commander.
And then didn't have interesting spells later and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It lost against the 2 lieutenants put together, which I find absolutely hilarious.
And then a lot more damage with his weapons, to the extent that I will need to be nerfing if he's overtuned, but I don't think it will be. Warlocks, you can now get 8 of them. And Conceal now provides melee damage resistance as well as the old ranged. So it'll just be global damage resistance. The description is updated. The 8 Warlocks has not been extended to 8 Bards. If you go Harlequins, I think that was something I just forgot on my part. So I probably should increase the Bards to 8.
That might be okay, because guards give more buffs than warlocks, I think.
I think they just don't give the damage reduction, but then give extra power. I'll have to look exactly at that.
Yeah, but I feel like extra power is more stackable. So
yeah, we'll see.
Think
yeah,
I'm happy to leave bards at 6 and warlocks at 8 to give a bit more distinction between the two. But if over time we think that bards you need to be able to get more bards as well, then that's fine.
Yeah, Harlequin mask leader never got benefits from the fleet of foot and the infantry researches, so that's just been fixed. Wraithguard and Wraith Blades, in short, are now tankier with less damage. And then there's been other adjustments to fit in with the changes to the infantry researches, but mostly they are tankier with less damage. Same with the Ancient Wraithguard. That looks like a nerf, but you've got to bear in mind that's getting health back.
Yeah. Remember the tier 4 researches, they benefit from them now, so it basically all evens out to the same values.
Yeah. Spirit Seer, just a bit of buff. So Spirit Seers are just on the Wraith Guards, so they need to be a bit tankier. Shadow Seer, big change. This is a counter buff to previous nerfs. A bit more strength on the building speed buff that the Shadow Seer has, which for a lot of people is the one reason you buy them. Yeah, that's been a bit of a tricky thing to try and get right. So that's been a bit strengthened. Okay, so some big changes in the support portal. The Hollow Fields research is now on vehicles as standard. So it's a bit of an early game buff. Less stuff for you to have to spend money on in tier 1 is the reason I did this. And a bit more cost-effective vehicles considering the fact that you have to spend so much on researches for your infantry. So this is a bit of a early game quality of life buff. Same with the Nightwings, their research has just been rolled into the base stats. So they're just gone. And we've now got 2 tiers of researches for vehicles. In tier 2, you can basically buff the tier 1 vehicles. And in tier 3, you can buff the tier 2 vehicles and the tier 1 vehicles again. This just keeps the vehicles usable for longer and should give you a bit more choice in the sort of the mid game rather than having to use whatever is in the tier that you're in. So a bit more role play and a bit more, choice in what you can use. This is something that I would like, in my opinion, of how the game could work. I wouldn't mind this being more in other races because I do like not being forced into using just your tiers units, but it's a huge amount of work, and this is kind of like a trial run. We'll see how it works.
Now, there is a case of, most factions' vehicles don't scale well above their tier. With CSM, with their sub-faction units being, one of the few exceptions, and demons being another exception, again, because of the researchers, it all comes down to the fact that usually, unlike infantry, vehicles don't have researches to scale them up. So, because of that, they're kind of usable, and then you dispose of them and you get new ones as you go up in tiers. So, yeah. I don't think all factions should have vehicles that scale.
Absolutely.
Especially because a lot of the later vehicles are just replacements for earlier vehicles anyway. Yeah. But I do think it would be good for at least some factions to have vehicles that scale later on.
Yeah, and in terms of lore, for things like Imperial Guard, you do have shit vehicles and good vehicles.
Yes.
So it makes sense that that your shit vehicles aren't going to last too long. But yeah, this is something I would like people to let me know how they feel. But you should be able to use. I think the one that a lot of people will enjoy is being able to use Wraith Guard a lot further. Because they're tier 1 units, they're going to get 2 sets of buffs. But also just your basic things, your Wave Serpents and your Falcons, just having 2 sets of upgrades. Because the Falcon Grav Tank is like the quintessential tank for Eldar, and it's unusable pretty much in tier 2. So yeah, Alistair, I agree. Yeah, we'll kind of see how it feels, whether people enjoy it. Wraith Lords have a slight health nerf, and they will always maybe excessively strong in tier 1, so that they then won't too shit in tier 2. But that's fixed by having the hollow shield research rolled in, and then the researches. Walker and the Wasps have all been nerfed. So that then when they get their tier 2 upgrade, they're not overpowering. Nightwings have all been nerfed. Because, again, any increases to those from the researchers, we're going to get very nasty very quickly. So Nightwing's going to start off a lot weaker. They're going to get a bit better. And of course, you've got a quite substantial buff for them if you take Ally Talk. So there's a lot of fun you can have with Nightwings if you do want to go to Ally Talk. A bit of a quality of life buff for the Hemlock Wraith Fighter. Their friendly fire aura has been made really small.
Yeah, I do think it was a bit big, where it was difficult to position around it.
Yeah, I was trying to sort of introduce a really big nerf to using them because they were really strong, and it never really felt very good. No. Super heavy tanks have had some buffs to range. The Cobra is now the designated anti-demons.
Some of these units got nerfs in past updates. So this is just kind of like giving them a slightly different role while still maintaining the fact that they're, not as good as they were before. Because before, I think the Lynx specifically was like insanely strong.
Yeah. Storm Serpent buffed a little bit. But yes, it is certainly now Deathstalkers versus Titans, Cobras versus Demons. And then that's all in the descriptions. But that's the intention now. Because before, the only difference between Deathstalker and the Cobra was the Cobra had less damage but more AoE. And all the pens were the same, so we've kind of split them a little bit. Phantom Titan has had all of its weapons standardized to one range to make them easier to use.
This is something that I've had to do a lot for like vehicles and Titans, where they'd have things at slightly different ranges. And it's great thematically. It's horrible gameplay wise, because when you move a unit, it will go to its furthest weapon range and then stop there. So,
and of course, usually your higher DPS weapons are your closer range stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, on the Phantom Titan, the missiles like 20% of the damage. And so a lot of the time you had an 80% damage nerf because...
Yeah.
And that is why I have generally been doing what you're saying there, just standardizing weapons in a unit so that most of it's...
the same range, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe not for things like if you've got like a long range tank, its secondary weapons can be shorter. But apart from that, web sale, we've changed all of the auras to start at 50 and then a bit of rebalancing. That'll make sense in a second. So Eldritch Spire, this is where we've also had a bit of contention in people's opinions. This is how I wanted to add strength in the late game. So basically what we've done is we've removed everything that was in there before. So access to the nukes and the global stealth, the infinite money, extra avatars. Probably forgotten one. We've got rid of all of them, and now it is a Emperor's Armory mechanic. There's something like 11 different stones. You can get 3 of them. That does include the super weapon stone, because some of these are quite strong. So my idea is that you can have super weapons and then 2 other buffs. Or if you're like me and never use super weapons, you can have 3 buffs. So what I do think we need to do, though, which I think someone pointed out, is not limit it to one Eldritch Spire, because apparently most races can have multiple nuke centers.
Most races' nuke centers can be... basically, they have an increasing cost where each one increases the cost of the next one significantly, but you can have multiple nuke centers,
And they don't have a global cooldown. You can fire off 2 nukes if you've got the resources for it.
Yeah, no, their cooldowns are not global. Honestly, I need to rework... nukes might be the next rework, honestly, now that I think about it. So we might not need to change Eldar because I might change how nukes work in the first place. So we'll see.
I'm just remembering, I'm just going to message you because so I can note it down later. Aspect armor description, I need to check. Nuke center, if we do need to change it, and card number, if we do need to change it. So logged somewhere. Cool. So the different stones then, we've got the infantry stone, which is most of your infantry that isn't Wraith units. So this will be mostly your Aspect Warriors and your Harlequins, also just Bone Singers, Death Jesters, and all Grav platforms. So this is all Grav platforms. That includes your Graters from Yimlock and Ulthwy. Basic price, 1800. Support stone is Grav tanks, super heavies, aircraft, jet bikes, and the War Walker. Same price. And then your Wraith Guard, your Wraith units. So Wraith Guard, Blades, Wraith Lords, Soul Walkers, Wraith Knights, Wraith Seer, Fist of All, Same price. So these are very much equivalents. If you want to just make your army more powerful, this is a 20% increase in damage and health. These are all available in tier 4. So yeah, if you want a later game strength, these are your main stuff. Your hero stone is a lot cheaper. Doesn't affect the avatars. But it's going to double the damage of your Autarch, your Farseer, your Shadow Seer. Your Shadow Seer can also get a lot stronger when you go Lugganath. So the Shadow Seer, I do want to see if some people use it as a combat unit. Warlock, Spirit Seers, Bards, Seer Council.
Ooh, I need to try that.
Mounted Seer Council. I really want to make Shadow Seer fun and powerful.
Yeah.
So this is quite potentially the weakest one. I mean, obviously it's the cheapest. This is the one
I
I
honestly might still need to be cheaper still. Because you have the opportunity cost of it taking up one of your 3 slots and you're buffing very specific units.
Yeah, the reason it doesn't do the avatars is because the avatars have their own thing.
Yeah, no, I agree that it shouldn't do the avatars.
Yeah.
But I think it either needs to be cheaper still, or more interesting, maybe give them some kind of powerful but very long cooldown abilities. So, like, for example, for the campaign, something that I've done is the campaign commanders, some of them that are not spellcasters, specifically, the ones that are not spellcasters, they all gain some kind of big, long cooldown ability on certain war gears. So maybe something on those lines?
Yeah.
Well, we can chat about it in
Or
the
buffed
future.
versions of spells and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. My initial thought is that even if it doubles their damage, it's still not great.
Well, you don't get any of these for the damage anyway. It's kind of... They're all kind of more support.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Like,
I think...
the damage, like, their health is fine. The damage doesn't matter too much, and the general utility of the commanders makes it so these buffs aren't that impactful.
I'll tell you what I think it'd actually be most useful for. Is if you're actually just using Aspect Warriors, just so that the buffs that you get from your Warlocks last longer before they're killed. Especially if it's quite cheap.
You know what could work? Cooldown reduction.
We've got to be
Playing more
careful because we're
spells.
close to a lot of spells getting too much cooldown reduction and then doing the infinite loop. Things like
True.
yeah, we'd have to
That or some additional utility to the commanders. I don't know, something. Because like the others make sense. This one looks weak for
sure.
its cost, or even just the opportunity cost of missing one of the 3.
Yeah. Titans, similar to the ones above. Same 20% buff, more expensive, obviously. So this is all the boring stuff. Depends what you're after. This is where stuff's changing then afterwards. So the Avatar Stone is exactly the same as it was before. 5,000, so it's expensive. But you can get an extra avatar of each type. So you get your original avatar from your shrine, and then you get one more of each type from the web sale. You can have 3 avatars. Obviously, they're all full price, plus an extra 10,000 resources. Yeah, it can be fun. The web cell stone will make them build quicker and will double all of the auras. So there's no longer a global stealth. That's just been gone. But what you've got now is a much more affordable way of getting, really big aura stealth.
And health regen and everything else.
And the health regen and the sight. In fact, to be honest, the sight buff is probably the most noticeable.
Yeah, that's fair.
I get this often. This next one, I'm not sure. We're not doing the whole infinite, but to be honest, it was so expensive, you never get it. The idea is that it's the same cost as going to tier 5. So you can either go to tier 5 or you can go to you can stay in tier 4 longer, but get a quite strong. I've got a feeling this might be too powerful. what I found is that with I think it's 4 HQs worth of power and this, that's when you can start just having one of the permanent income redistributors always on. So you can have 4 bases of power, and then the nerf to the power, but the boost to the requisition, and still have like 780 power income. So it may be a little bit too strong, but people can use it. I mean, it does take away an option. This is one of your 3.
It takes away an option, and it's quite an expensive investment to begin with. So I think it should be fine because it's later. Because you need to remember that you're comparing this to other factions' income, where other factions can start scaling their income in tier 3, and even the ones that get it in tier 4 can probably get it faster.
This will be late tier 4 when you would be going to tier 5, yeah.
Exactly. Where I think the closest comparison to this is Chaos and their Desecrated, not Shrine, whatever it's called. Desecrated Castle, I think.
Yeah. Cool. And then the Super Weapon Stone, which is just lets you use your nukes. Yeah. All available in tier 4 except for the Avatar Stone and the Titan Stone. So the Titan buff is in tier 5. You've still got the Titan buffs from the Ball Portal.
Okay.
Yeah. And then just a load of descriptions.
So, yeah, let me fire through changes after that. So, Imperial Guard, it's mostly typos. There isn't any balance changes there.
Oh yeah.
Necrons, also just description changes. Sisters, Exorcist Sanctorum, the Whirlwind basically equivalent, was a bit too strong, so nerfed its cap so that you can spam less of them. And then some description changes. Space Marines. Yeah, just some description and quality of life changes as well to begin with, and then it's bikes. Bikes. So, as I found out, bikes worked weirdly, where you think, visually looking at them, you think the way bikes work is, let's say you get the plasma pistol upgrade, right, on your bikes. You think, visually looking at them, what happens is that they still shoot the guns on the front of the bike, and now they're shooting a pistol from their hand. That's not the way they worked. The pistol actually replaced what are meant to be the twin-linked weapons on the front of it.
Oh shit, I didn't realize
which
that.
Was very weird. So, yeah, all bikes gotta rebalance and rework to where they have both twin bolters on the front and then the side weapons. Or, for example, you could get, a little carriage thing on the side with a special, with a heavy weapon or something along those lines, or, with a melta-gun, and that would also replace the main weapon, so... There was a lot of just weird stuff where the way it worked visually and the way it actually worked behind the scenes just didn't match. So I just kind of reworked all of them to where they're a bit stronger, but it's more expensive to actually get the weapons because instead of replacing your weapons, they are an addition. So
Sweet.
Your top power of your bikes is... more, but it costs more.
Lovely.
So yeah, so that's that. And then Whirlwind Mark II was a bit too expensive in terms of cap for the cost.
Yeah, 6 is a lot.
Vindicator took way too long to build. So reduced the time of that. Rhino reduced to 1 supply and standardized it to 140, which is kind of most transports tend to be equal rec to power costs, so this is just kind of standardization to make it in line. And technically it's a bit of a nerf because power is more valuable. but it might in reality be a buff, because if you're using transports, you want to use other infantry, so you don't care about the cost of power that much. Razorback, same idea, where supply costs reduced, and then twin last cannons moved up so that they're not too powerful, because the last cannon weapons are just very powerful now. The Dreadnought last cannon is tier 1. Tier 3 was just way too high for it, but reduced DPS. Ironically enough, even for tier 1, the DPS was not that insane, so just a slight nerf was enough. And then Melt-A-Gun has been made, has significantly more damage, so that it's actually a viable option in tier 2 instead of the last cannon, because before it's just, you just get the last cannon. Well, cool. You couldn't, because last cannon was tier 3, but now Melt-A-Gun being shorter range, you would nearly always want the last cannon, so it has more damage.
Cool. And there is always an argument to keep the last cannon in tier 2 for the safety of the range, but you can go for the Melt-A-Gun if you want to brawl it out. Cool.
Yeah. Vindicator reduced cost. Do I have Vindicator twice? I do have Vindicator twice. Oopsie. But yeah, Vindicator also has reduced cost. It was just way too expensive for its tier. And more DPS, larger AoE. It was meant to be good versus swarms, or like have a large AoE. It didn't actually do any damage. It just knocked models around. So now it actually does damage.
Lovely.
And Land Raider, so this is one of the things we, as with the Eldar Titan, where the Flamers were 25 range, which was technically fine, but also it was very awkward to try to get them to actually shoot, so they've just gotten a range increase so that they can actually shoot with all the other weapons.
Lovely. Yep, so the Tau... What does it mean these tanks getting access to the infiltration extension? When's that going to change something?
So this only matters if you have an ally that has cloaking that can affect allies. So I think maybe Eldar cloaking can affect allies, and
Eldar
these vehicles
can
will just
if they
not
pay for
affect.
the expensive one. Yes.
Yeah. Before, these units would just not get cloaked.
Cool.
They would just not get any cloak because they didn't have the right setup for it, basically.
Cool, that makes sense.
So that's basically what that means, since I don't think Tau have their own way of cloaking these units, but if allies do, then now these units will actually get cloaked.
Lovely. Cool.
And then
Tyranids.
Basic description changes. More description. It's all description from here. So, major thing, Tyranids. Yes, the subfaction system. So, do you want to pull up some of the pictures?
Actually, if you give me a second, I think I had to save them to my desktop.
Yeah. Well, whilst you're figuring that out, it's not super important. So, the main interesting bit, or the main unique quirk of this subfaction system, is that all of the different subfactions, so you can pick 2 out of 3. Similar idea to Chaos, where you pick 2 out of 4. The catch here is that the different subfactions, they share equipment. Where if, for example, you get gravity grenades for the Eldar subfaction, your Tau or Imperial infantry will also get those grenades. So, to kind of give a basic description of it, you have 3 subfactions: Imperial Guard, Eldar, and Tau. Each one brings a roster of, I think it's like somewhere between 10 and 15 units.
Oh shit.
It's a lot, but also, like, if you look at Tyranids' last patch, like 2.71, where I've compartmentalized all of their buildings. They have 2 buildings that are completely empty, and the other buildings don't look full, even with that. Like, Tyranids have an insanely low number of actual units. It's just that they were kind of spread out between multiple buildings, where you had multiple buildings that could build like 1 or 2 units or had 1 or 2 things in there. And that it wasn't as visible, but now that I've actually compartmentalized and put together all of the Tyranid stuff, they had multiple buildings that literally had nothing in them. So, because of that, the subfactions will probably play a role in Tyranids more than most other factions, because of just how little Tyranids have, so how much needed to be added as a kind of compromise to that.
So, I think some people are probably going to say this is a cop-out. But if the models don't exist, the models don't exist. I mean, I know there is... I'm behind the times. I know there is another Tyranid mod being made. I'm not sure who's making it. If there'd be a potential in the future of having access to some of that, so I just can't remember. But yeah, there is not a lot of Tyranid models available. But in terms of gameplay-wise, this could be very fun. Always playing it.
The thing is, yes, you have all of these new units, but they're not... I was careful to make sure that they're not strict replacements for Tyranid units. The Tyranids units are still useful because the subfactions still work... So the synapse mechanic still works on all of the subfaction infantry, which means that if your subfaction infantry is beside synapse models, it will get a movement speed buff and I think an attack speed buff, or like I think different synapses give different buffs. Point is, they will be buffed by all of the Tyranid leaders, and the Tyranid thrall units scale a bit better, I think, than the subfaction units, and have different roles. Like, there is no Hormagaunt equivalent, there is no, like, melee swarm unit in here, or like that kind of thing. So,
filling gaps in the roster.
All of the Tyranid units should still hopefully have a place. It's just that you have more options now.
Sweet.
So yeah.
Yeah. Alistair, yes, using Dawn of War 2 models is something that's possible to do. It's also possible to do properly, which other mods don't convert them properly. But it's not something we really try to do too much. I don't even know what's in Dawn of War 2.
I mean, it basically comes down to time and effort. The time and effort that it would take to grab the Dawn of War 2 models, which when you look at it, what models are in Dawn of War 2 that aren't in here? Zoanthropes exist, all of the Gaunts already exist, Raveners exist, Warriors exist, Swarmlord exists, Hive Tyrant exists. Like, there aren't really actually many units in Dawn of War 2, even when you consider something like Elite Mod, that aren't already in Dawn of War 1. Because when Dawn of War 2 was made, even in tabletop, Tyranids had a pretty limited roster. Tyranids got their roster expanded in the tabletop somewhat recently. I believe it was like a few years ago is when they really started getting a lot of new models. So even something like that isn't actually going to benefit us all that much. And on top of that, the effort that it would take to transfer the models would be equivalent to actually just making them.
Yeah.
So, no, it's not worth it on both respects.
Cool.
So yeah, so I'm interested to see what people think of the Tyranid Subfactions. I think it's very interesting. I think the thing that specifically makes it quite replayable is the fact that you can have units have upgrades that they can't normally get. For example, Imperial Guard have their whole bolster defenses where you just hunker down and you give your units ranged damage reduction. Eldar units are usually very squishy and they don't get to have that. Now, Eldar units can hunker down with the bolster defenses and get that benefit as well. Usually Fleet of Foot is not something that you have on either Imperial Guard or Tau. Their infantry is generally relatively slow. Now they do. So, yeah. I think those interactions are going to be the main selling point, and I'm curious to see what people think about it.
It should be quite a fresh gameplay experience because it is so different. Yeah, you are playing, in effect, sort of a fully fleshed race that people are used to playing, but then with, combined with an extra 2 races, it's a very different gameplay experience, and hopefully people will, enjoy that.
And I made sure that all of the units can scale, which means that the roster, most of the roster, both in Tyranids and the subfactions, will be relevant for the majority of the game. So it's not just, get these units, throw them out next year, get new ones.
Sweet. Yeah, so I guess we're... Ugh, punch myself in my face with... so I guess that's mostly everything gone through then for this patch.
Yep.
Yeah. Invite anyone who's not in the Discord to come to the Discord. That's where you get all the help. Hopefully we are going to start doing a lot more casting. My vague idea is just asking people to send in replay files that they think is particularly interesting, and then we'll just whip through a few of them. I'd love to do a couple a week, just get sort of 2 or 3 games out a week, because it wouldn't take too much effort for us if it's replays, because we can just load them up and get casting within a few minutes. And
I'll also be making guides on Tyranid. I don't think I have a Tyranid guide yet. No. I'll also be making guides on Tyranids, or specifically there's no Tyranids guide. So I'll be making guide on Tyranids plus the subfactions, and also the IG stronghold. So look forward to that. And future work, who knows? It'll be something.
I'll also try and get out the Eldar Craft World guide, which should have the build orders as well. And as I can't remember if Alex said it on stream or not, but might also just restart the Eldar playthrough of the campaign.
Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks everyone for watching. Hope everyone on YouTube enjoys this. I know it's very boring to a lot of people, but also I think a lot of people just enjoy hearing why we do stuff, because we do tend to overthink everything, try and make sure that we make good decisions, and we want to share that with you guys. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.